afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone's awake. It's almost right after lunch. I'm hoping we can keep you awake with this almost controversial topic. So I'll just start off with my own introduction. I'm Bhumika. I'm from Thoughtworks, and I've been with Thoughtworks for about 5 years now. And I've been a QA all my career, which is about 8 years now. Worked across different domains with different tools, performance testing, functional, web services. Yeah, that's about me.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. We were thinking maybe we could start with some chicken dance or something just because it's an afternoon session. But I realized I would also have to participate, so we changed that idea. So I'm Anand Bagmar. I'm a test practice lead at Thoughtworks. Been doing testing for quite some time. And today, we are taking a very bold step coming to a Selenium conference and saying we should not be writing Selenium tests. I've asked Andrew to keep one door open for us just in case if we need to run out. So please keep that exit pathway clear for us in case if it gets hostile. And let's enjoy the ride. Why do we do test automation? I think that is the most important question that we need to answer. I've heard answers saying, I do test automation because I like coding. I like to do test automation because I like to find defects. Would you agree with that? Okay, you don't need to do anything of that. The intent, yes, of course, you need to love what you're doing, and automation is coding, so if you don't love it, then you are not doing the right thing. But the real purpose of automation is not to find defects, it's to ensure that if things which were working well before, if they start failing, you have some way to capture that as quickly as possible. And that quick feedback is the most essential aspect from test automation. We'll see as we proceed later today, there are various different flavors to this. The point is, we don't want to do Selenium anymore. We want to just get quick feedback. And let's see how we can get that.
So we'll quickly look at a case study. It's not really a software case study that we'll go with first. It's something that all of us actually use in our day-to-day life, hopefully, if you're still writing, and not really only scribbling away on our phones, on our laptops with a pen. So that's the pen. I have a pen here. All of us write. Now, how do you test a pen, or rather, how is a pen manufactured? We probably have an assembly line. There's a manufacturing company that's actually manufacturing a pen. What do they do? How do they go about making this pen look like this? They have an assembly line. They have these different parts that are actually put together at the end of the line. But if I'm a QA in such a place, in such a company that's actually doing this, how would I go about testing it? Will I just go ahead, grab the pen at the end of the line, start writing with it, and will that only be my test? What do you guys think? What are the different things I can do with an end product? Sorry? Clicking? Okay. What else? Okay. But it's already there as one full pen. Perfect. So that's what I was thinking, actually. I'd probably...
But no, it's not really perfect, right? I strongly disagree on that one. It's a pen. Why are you taking it apart? We have to make sure it writes well. We have to make sure it writes on the surfaces it's supposed to write on. Can I use this pen to write on the TV? Sorry, we won't do that, but that's what the pen is supposed to be doing, right? Why are we taking it apart? Why do we need to take the cap off, put it back on again?
But my functionality is not really tested yet, right? The functionality of a pen is actually to write.
But you have to maintain it. You can have test cases.
But what's a...
Customer may be using it differently than you expect them to. Maybe they want to take apart a few pieces of it. Maybe they use a spring to go
Okay, now we are getting in interesting territories.
All right.
How well the pen is put together, then you might be able to know how long it's going to be able to write.
But is that functionality of the pen? It's supposed to write. My functionality of a pen is to write.
It affects the quality of the pen in terms of its future functionality. Control the manufacturing processes precisely to achieve the desired goal, and will write. You don't need to test that.
Right?
If you want to, you can, but they don't test every car that comes off the assembly line, drive around the country to make sure it works. No, they control the unit manufacturing processes so that at the end of the assembly line, you have a working car. Also, what doesn't make maybe is they're actually just choosing the factors they don't know how they successfully pass and how they fail. And then after that, decide, okay, here's the fact of the whole. That we either discard or allow them to continue on.
Right. Interesting. So all of us talked about these different things that we actually want to do before we probably put this out in the market, right? We wanted to break it down. We wanted to take it apart. We want to see how it clicks, how it writes across different pages, for how long. But then if you had to really classify it, or if you want to break it down and start off earlier on, even before the whole component of this pen is assembled, then how do you go about it? I think like someone here said, you just take it apart. But probably not really at the end, but when these small things are actually manufactured, like the nib of the pen or the refill of the pen, that itself is one small part. Why not test it earlier on? Why do you have to wait for it to be built completely, put together completely, then test it later on? The whole purpose of quick feedback is then lost. We're not really testing it early. We're testing it much later when it's actually completely built and it's already inside. Then how do you test it before? We start looking at using all of these individual parts earlier on. I just take the refill. I see if my ink is actually fitting in. The viscosity of the ink could be one of the things that I test. Is it enough? If I hold my refill upside down, will it actually flow out? Ideally, it shouldn't. The viscosity should be good enough. And if I'm filling the refill with ink, am I filling it right? Is the nozzle that is actually filling in, is it correct? Is the dimension correct for this refill? All of these different things will actually make this testing of the refill itself or testing a small unit of this pen earlier. So if something doesn't work, I know for a fact that I'm giving that feedback much earlier on and not like really at the end when it's all done. I don't know if I'll probably do. All of us have probably kids, and they do take out all of this, and they probably are doing a lot of these bunch of different things. And if the ink is not great, if the viscosity is not great, it'll probably pour out. That's not a great thing to have. So I'm testing it way later than what I should have done. I should have tested much, much earlier on. Now that's what I'm trying to talk about here. To look at all of the components that make up your pen, see where they're actually how are they being manufactured, how are these different things fitting in together. So now if I put back the refill inside, is it actually going in? Is it actually going to stick inside? And then if I close it back, will it actually come out through? Does the nib come out through from my pen? Ideally, it should. Now, that's where my integration test is actually coming in, right? I'm integrating my component, which is a refill. I'm putting it inside my container over here. I'm trying to see if it actually fits into my pen itself. Now, if it's too small, or if there's no spring inside, I've taken out the spring. If it's not there, I can't write. It'll just go in. I can't really write. Or probably this will not work. See how it comes out? So one small part missing, and the whole pen is screwed up. And that's not what I want. That's where I have to test it way earlier. I cannot, when it's actually, I have to take out this refill. When the refill is being manufactured, I take it out. I try and see if there's another part that actually fits in. I try and put that in. Does it really fit? Does the dimension of the spring actually fit in and go inside? Does it stay there and not fall off? So what does that mean? So what does that really mean? What should we be doing as QAs? Okay. What else? So test each part thoroughly. We're not just going to test everything put together. We're going to test each of these things, different things, much, much more. Even a simple nib can have multiple test cases. Is the color right? Is the refill that I'm going in not going to seep out through the material of the refill itself? If I put an ink into it, does the ink flow out from any other part? Ideally, it shouldn't. Does the nib fit in correctly into my pen? I hope it does, because if it doesn't, I can't write. So all of these different things, small things for a nib or for a refill needs to be tested extremely well. Now, what do you call each of these small components? They are just units. And how do I see if these different things actually work together well? I put the nib into the refill. Like I said, dimensions should be right for the nib to go in. And that becomes component integration. Now that probably the test case or the number of tests that I will do here will be probably lesser than how much I would actually just do with a nib, right? Because with a nib, I'm probably looking at the material, the shape of it, how the ink flows through it, or probably the size of it, everything. But would I really do that with component? No. Component integration, probably not. I'd probably look at how it actually fits in here. And if I had to individually write with just the refill, will it actually not go in? It doesn't go in when I press on it, because that's the main that's what I would want to do.
So to do the component integration, we need to understand what the behavior of these different systems really are, right? The different pieces are. And that interaction is what is really important. So it's not as complex as the word component integration in that sense. It's just understanding the rules, the boundaries of how different pieces are coming together and making sure all those rules associated with them are being met at all points in time.
So all of these parts of a pen are there now. Now what do I do next? I've tested all of these combinations of different parts coming together. I have the refill, I have the cylinder, the pen body, I have the clicker, I have text written over on this, the branding of the pen itself. All of that is there. I've tested all of that. But am I missing something here? Have I missed out testing something at all? Exactly. So what does that come? What is that? I'm trying to test how it all comes together. And that's what we do even in software. We try to test the functionality or the business scenario where we'll actually test all of this, right? So that's my functional test. It's supposed to do what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to write. I didn't use it. I didn't write at all using this pen. And that's how a pen becomes, all of these parts to put together become a pen. But wait, what are we missing? What about things that we don't really do? Unit test is fine. Each unit tested is fine. Each component put together is fine. The functionality I've tested, what else is missing here? What happens? I hope it doesn't break. That's the main thing. What else? Yeah. So I probably write like about 20, 30 pages with it. Does the ink get over in that many pages after writing for a long time? So what's that? Sorry?
It depends on the requirements. What are the requirements for your pen? You need to work in zero gravity at 300 degrees below zero. There's a lot of factors that could go into it.
Yep.
Don't know what they are yet.
Yep. So that's not really functional though. What's it there? Your test.
User acceptance.
Probably. There's
User acceptance would be more on the functional side, how it all comes together, right? Not a lot of what we were speaking about, what happens if it falls down, what should happen if it is supposed to work in zero gravity. These are not necessarily user acceptance of sorts. Maybe in some of them there's a fine line, but yes, different categorizations.
So we're calling it non-functional.
What about the quality of the way that it writes?
Sorry.
The quality of the way that it puts ink on the paper. I know when I have a pen that writes better than another pen, that's important.
Well, that could be that's again ink, right? That's the quality of the ink that you'd probably test.
So I'll actually ask, or turn that question around. Would that be a unit test, an integration test, or a functional test?
I don't know, it could be a unit test, right? Because it could be the roller ball and the ink module by itself, how it applies to machines.
Right. But then would you be able to make that decision if I give you two different nibs with the same ink or whatever different thing? Would you be able to have the same end result saying that one is better than the other?
Well, I mean, if the roller ball and the ink module, wrote a certain way in unit test, but then you put it in a cartridge test with different shapes, different sizes, it might not write.
Exactly. So all these different types of tests that we've identified, they are all instrumental, critical in leading up towards determining the quality of the pen as a whole. It cannot be just units. It cannot be just functionals. It is going to be a combination. For the specific case that you mentioned, it has to be a combination of actually unit, integration, and functional for that matter, right? That is what will tell you that end user experience, yes, this is good or bad.
All right. So what about the other example? What else could you actually think of? Like, how do I fill in ink into this? There are probably robotics, which is actually doing all of that. And that sort of becomes a third-party integration, right? That's also another thing that we have to think about. If I do find a bug in probably when I expose it to too much heat, or even if I just keep it next to my laptop, that heat is too much for my pen, and it starts melting away. Then that means the way I'm manufacturing this pen itself needs to change. Now, that's the feedback that I'm going to give. And that will probably change the way my robot that is actually manufacturing this whole thing, the algorithm probably in it would change. That's not really just testing this pen. It's also changing how I will actually look at the integration with the different things that is building this pen itself. So that's another thing that we'll probably have to look at when we're testing any product or project or website or anything else. All this is fine. I'm testing a pen, but how does it all tie back to software? Because that's our job. We look at software, we build software, we look at testing mobile apps, websites, all of these different things. Let's take an example here. All of us have flown through, all of us have actually probably taken flights over here. We've used multiple airline sites to book. Let's look at probably one such example, which is the convenient one that we've seen a lot in the US, Delta website. Now, looking at an airline site, what's the most common thing that you would do? Yeah, we'd search for a flight, book a flight, enter our details, pay for it, get a PNR out of it. If you had to break it down into multiple, if I had to look at the software that's gone into building this website, I'd probably have come up with these different components. You'd have a flight search page, then that would, once you look for something, it would lead to a search results page where you have these bunch of different sites or different search results and everything. And you select a flight from there, and you have these different flight details for my existing flight that I've selected. And then you go on to fill in your passenger info, make a payment for it, and confirm. But what goes on? Is that enough if I have just a test scenario that only just tests that functionality? Probably not. It's not going to be enough for me. Because I need to know what's happening behind the scenes. I need to know how my application server is going to return those results. What's really happening in my application server? Or how are my DB queries actually going to interact with, what are the different DB queries that will actually be sent out? What are the different things that what if I get a null response? What if I have, in one of my tables, a null as my primary ID? Those are the different things I will have to test. But is that enough? Is it enough if I have a functional test for it? I can't really cover all of it over there. So going back to the same example of a pen, we broke it down, right? Similarly, we break it down for even a software. So we break it down into probably DB queries, multiple web services that will actually be there for our flight search results, flight details, and all of these different things. These are probably web services that are being called, or APIs, or anything else that's actually getting us some responses. We'll have to test it at those different levels. There's of course the view of the page itself. That's another thing that we'd have to test. Will you have functional tests for probably, so if you look at passenger info page, it has multiple text boxes. Will we actually write a functional test for it? What if there are different scenarios that I have to cover with error scenarios? How many functional tests can you actually write over there? Would we want to write a functional test over there? Probably not. We'd probably put it in a lower level, not really there, but maybe have a JavaScript test that will only invoke that page, look at all the error scenarios over there, and have one probably end-to-end scenario where it says, let me look at this whole scenario. I will probably not enter anything in that functional scenario. I'll go ahead, create an error scenario, then fill in all my details, and then go ahead, confirm that booking. So that's just one test at the functional level. All of these different, anything else can probably be covered at multiple other places and not at the functional level. Now, what does that mean from our previous example as well? We test each of these parts thoroughly. So you could go ahead and test all of the DB queries that our application server is making thoroughly. Then see if my application server is working together with my DB itself. What are the commands, or what are the queries, or what are the methods that are invoking these queries into my DB? I go ahead and test them as well. So I'm trying to integrate and see different parts of my software coming together and see if that integration itself is working fine. And then I have my functional test, which will actually see that whole end-to-end flow. Let me try and make a booking. That's my end-to-end flow. But here and there, we do have some variations of error scenarios. That can be covered in the most minimalistic of scenarios. So you have more, as in when you go up, unit, you have more scenarios to cover. Integration of two different parts coming together, you have probably lesser. And then just a minimalistic coverage at the topmost layer. Test the non-functionals. It could be anything. It could be about how well it responds, what are the different security hacks that can happen over there, all of those different things. Third-party integration could be if I come in from a different site, like a kayak. If I come in from there, does it go ahead and can I make that booking well? No, is that all enough? It probably isn't. We need to know what's happening behind the scenes. We just cannot rely on the web pages that we have. It's not enough for us as QAs, or when we are looking at building quality, it's not enough for us to actually just know how a website works. We need to know what are the different application servers, or we need to know the architecture of the system itself. So it also means that we need to start building quality in by testing earlier. You test the DB queries, you test the integration of your application server with the DB. You also start testing how each page loads these different icons differently. But then how do you do all of this? Be inquisitive, ask questions, ask a lot of questions. Why is it this way? Why are these queries being written? How is it written? When do these queries get invoked? And what are these queries that are getting invoked? Do a lot of research on how these different systems come together. Look at how you can actually incorporate testing much earlier. Talk to their developers. What is the code that's actually going on? If they've done some refactoring, ask them what else can change. Can I test it earlier? Do I really need to have a functional test to cover all of this?
Another aspect of the research is more on the domain side as well. If you do not understand that domain very well, your questions are going to be very superficial again. Whatever actions you do in terms of testing or understanding the system better are still going to be at a superficial layer. So research is going to be from multiple perspectives.
So that also means that we need to keep the big picture in mind. We cannot lose out on quality just because I start understanding the technicalities of how things are implemented. I still need to test an end-to-end flow. I still need to know how the domain works, like Anand was saying. So all of this will start coming together.
So the big picture also brings out a different perspective. So it's, I'm speaking now from both sides of that particular story. While you need to be inquisitive, you need to ask a lot of questions, you need to do a lot of research, understand the system in depth. Remember, the focus is on making sure it all is coming together as well. So don't go so deep into one particular stack to understand it in depth that you forget about the other aspects as well. So it has to be a good balancing act. Now, what these examples we want to highlight is there is a lot that needs to happen from a testing perspective. Whether you're working waterfall, agile, based on whatever form of requirement documents, that is not your only scope. There is much, much more to it. Essentially, once you understand all that, it still comes down to automation. You understand now, based on all this information, what test cases, what test scenarios are important to be automated, to be validated from a system functionality perspective. And once you start automating it, how do you really get that feedback quickly? Because if you get a delayed feedback, it means the developer team has potentially moved on to something else, and the risk of fixing issues is now getting more and more delayed, finding and fixing issues. So one way of trying to think about where to focus on from a testing perspective is I always refer back to the test automation pyramid. Identify the right type of tests which are applicable to your product. Some of these might be very obvious. The standard ones that come in mind are definitely we think about unit, we think about functional. But there could be many more in that particular product suite that we can automate in different ways to get quicker feedback. Unit tests, for sure, we want to test the granular functionality of the code, the logic implementation, and get that quick feedback on the dev machine itself. It runs very fast. Maybe there is scope for integration tests. Integration, again, we spoke about different aspects, right? It could be a component integration, it could be integration with third-party systems. If you're in a microservice architecture, think about the contract test that might be there. If it's JavaScript heavy page, then a lot of JavaScripts can be written around it. During lunchtime, we were having an interesting conversation about certain financial software having a lot of screens and a lot of workflows. Now, if it's a 10-screen workflow to accomplish a particular business journey, I don't want to test hundreds of business scenarios based on that 10-page workflow. It is going to be very, very time-consuming. So invest in view test, for example. How can I, if I make a change to the 6th screen of the workflow, how can I set up the state of the system in such a way that 5 screens have been completed? Just load up the page on the 6th screen directly, validate those changes, and the test is complete. You have saved a lot of time in having to go through all those 6 different screens before you validate exactly what you want. So there are various different types of tests that can be done. We have to think about it and really make sure it happens like that. This is the ideal pyramid, what we see on screen. Ideal in terms of just different types of tests and what should be done more or less. But if you look at reality, unfortunately, you'll see a lot of anti-patterns in the industry. One of the anti-patterns is called the ice cream cone anti-pattern. Ice cream does sound good after lunch. What this means is, for various reasons, good or bad, I don't know if there's really a good reason for that matter, but you have very less unit test coverage. You have slightly better integration tests, more JavaScript, more view tests, whatever that might be. But the focus is on doing automation at the UI layer. And classic cases when you get into this anti-pattern is when you're working with legacy code bases which doesn't have enough test automation. That is one of the classic cases when you would have very less unit tests. But what this means is if you end up in this anti-pattern, there are so many UI-based tests, it takes ages for these tests to complete. Any small change in product code might result in a ton of failures on the UI tests. The feedback is slow, the tests are brittle, they are flaky, and as a result, you still need to invest a whole lot more in manual or exploratory testing to ensure things are working fine. So you're already investing a lot in automation, functional automation, but because it is not really giving the results as you expect, you're also focusing a whole lot more on manual exploratory testing around the same. Classic anti-pattern. Another anti-pattern is what I like to call the dual test pyramid anti-pattern, where the developers and testers, they are really sitting not together. And doesn't mean they have to sit in the same room, but they're not really collaborating well together, which means the developers are doing their automation in their own way, the testing team is doing their automation in their own way, and there's no coordination amongst them. The big risk over here is there could potentially be a lot of duplication of test cases that are automated. And I'm actually okay with that big risk, because there is a bigger risk which I cannot afford, is missing out on scenarios because of lack of coordination. And that one scenario miss itself could be a crucial aspect in the system going down at the wrong time. That is a very big risk of this anti-pattern. Third is a cupcake anti-pattern, where now you not just have two teams, developers and testers, you have got three teams, developers, automation testers, and manual testers. And there are all these walls in between them. Okay, I'm done with developing. Someone go and test it. Someone go and automate it. I don't really care what is happening. No one knows why certain things are done. So there are a lot of these anti-patterns which result in not having effective automation. Because remember, the automation pyramid, whatever shape it might be, that is a reflection of quality of your product. It's not just unit tests, it is not just functional tests, it is not just manual tests. All the different types of tests that you do, that combined together is going to tell you what is the quality of your product. And we need to invest in that. We need to think about how can we make sure that is done well, because automation code again is code. If you don't do that well, it is going to give you problems. You're not going to get the feedback correctly from it. So that's why we concluded we don't want to do any more UI tests. It's not really about Selenium or in that sense, right? It's any form of UI automation that you do. You have to really think about, does it make sense? Does it make sense to automate that scenario at a UI layer? Or can I, in some way, push it lower in the pyramid? Because if I push it lower in the pyramid, the test will run faster. You'll get quicker feedback out of it. And as a result, we'll know as quickly as possible if things are not going as expected. By chance, I actually stumbled upon this realization. It was my moment of epiphany. What are the different types of functional tests that we have? Different categorizations? No, in the functional UI tests, we have subcategories, right? What is the first set of tests that you would run when you do a deployment? Smoke. Next? Regression. That's a simple scenario, smoke and regression. Anyone has got much more extended structure? Sorry? Compatibility. You mean browser compatibility? Okay. That's another category. Operating system as well, correct. What others? Sorry? Visual testing. That actually gets into a different aspect of it, because with UI tests, you are not really doing visual testing in a traditional sense, right? Yes, visual testing does need you to bring up the UI in certain ways, whether it's an app or a web page, we need to do that. But from a functional test perspective, we've got smoke, sanity, regression, compatibility, and so many other categorizations. Maybe you also need to categorize it based on feature areas or release or whatever it might really be. There's no limit of how many categories can be done. Why do we do these categorizations? In what way speed? Speed of execution.
Similar to your pyramid that you're talking about, the units are fast, right? Smoke should be, in my perspective, fast.
Exactly.
When those first, they're sort of, yes, things look pretty good. Let's go to the next one with testing.
Correct. And spot on. The speed of execution is what matters. Do we have such categorization in the unit tests? Or integration tests? Any developers in the room? Have we heard of any categorization in unit tests, integration tests? I have not come across a, yeah?
Well, sure. I mean, you might have the perspective of validating functionality versus validating performance. And a lot of times performance is done at a low level, kind
So in what ways do you mean performance?
Large volume of testing an individual service, for example, scaling up and doing parallel service calls and looking at the performance response time of that prior to escalating it up higher in the development of the integration.
Sure. So it's about, I think you're talking more about from a performance perspective. You would start at a individual API level or a service call level, seeing parallel executions, how the performance speed might be and how it scales up before you really build the system and test similar type of interactions. Is that correct? Yeah. But that is still performance side of things. So I would sort of leave it out from a functional perspective for now. But in my 18, 20 years of experience in the industry or working in the industry, I have never come across any references to having categorizations in any different types of tests. And it's mainly because of speed. And if you look at it, if I have 1,000 functional UI tests, I might have 50,000 unit tests for that matter if it has been done correctly. But still for 50,000 unit tests, I don't have categorizations in the unit tests. It just comes down to speed. And that means I get feedback much, much more quickly with tests which are pushed down in the pyramid that I don't need to think about it in various different fashions. I don't have a smoke test for units. What that means is we clearly need to reduce the number of tests we have at the top, and not just for the sake of reducing it, but we need to find ways, have conversations with various team members to see this is the scenario that I have in mind. Which is the best layer in the pyramid to automate this? I was thinking about it as a UI layer, but maybe the developer tells me, no, this is more of a JavaScript test. Because it's a logic in JavaScript, I can very easily write it in a JavaScript test, and I'll get much more quicker feedback. I don't need to build and deploy this product on some environment for you to validate it. As Bhumika mentioned, there will still be a couple of tests you would have at that layer as well, but the focus is going to be on pushing it down without losing intent. There was a question. Absolutely.
So it's not just speeding it up. It's actually different. It might be worth it to run both tests, depending on what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. The comment is that if I move the test down from a functional UI layer down to unit, it's actually a different type of test. And that's exactly what I meant, at least if I did not say it in that way.
It's the same test, just a different category.
No, not really.
You've gone away from the UI test that has all that extra overhead of how long it takes to execute. And you're verifying underlying functionality, but you cannot skip the UI test. You still have to have it. You still have to make sure that all the lines in the UI work, all the responses work, all the rendering works. You still have to do that.
You need to do that. We are not saying no to UI tests, right? You have to make a dramatic statement to start thinking about it. Is it really required or not? To your point as well, I'm going to tie it together hopefully in a better way this time, is the intent of the test is important. You don't want to compromise on the intent of the test. What you're having a discussion about is where to automate that intent. Where does it make sense to automate that intent? At a unit level, I cannot automate the intent which a functional test is going to cover in any way. But maybe the functional test that I had in mind could be automated as a JavaScript test instead, right? So the intent should not be compromised. Where you automate it, that needs to be discussed and decided accordingly, because that conversation will help you lead into a better pyramid implementation. And maybe, as you said, maybe you need to have both of them because the intent is slightly different as well. So let's do that. We need to have as much automation as possible without compromising, because everything is going to be considered as quality of the product, or is going to reflect the quality of the product. So we need to think about this conversation aspect, right? It means that all the roles of the team, they need to be involved and they need to take collective ownership of the quality. It's not the QA or tester responsibility of quality anymore. To have this kind of conversation, it means developers have to be bought in, business analysts, product owners have to be bought in. What is the real intent of this particular feature? Why are we doing this? How can we automate it? Various different roles need to be involved, which means management also needs to be brought in because now other roles are going to be involved in conversations related with testing. Otherwise, questions will start coming in. Why are developers being part of this testing conversation? Sad thing, but it does happen. So that collective ownership is going to be very important. The whole intent of testing is, at least in today's day and age, if it was not there earlier, is we need to build the quality, and it's not about testing later, it's about testing early. And what are different ways that we can do that? Conversations is one of the most important things in that. We need fast feedback, we need to fail fast. If certain functionality has been changed, we need to fail fast and say, no, there's this other impact that is happening because of it. And these other tests reflect that aspect. We need to do that. We need to think beyond the obvious. We need to break down those boundaries and say, this is, story is done or requirement is done, I'm just going to test this piece. No, we need to start thinking more. We need to start thinking about things we cannot really see. For that, we need to understand architecture decently well, if not very well. We need to start contributing to that architecture to say, this doesn't seem to be testable. It is going to fail. As you were saying, the performance aspect, I think that's a classic case that we need to start building as the product develops. You cannot wait till later to say, now I will start my performance testing at an API level and then I'll scale it up. Maybe that part can start initially. Once the product is sort of built or stable to a certain level, then you do the end-to-end performance testing at that point. But you're not waiting for that basic API performance testing for the product to be built. There are various aspects of doing that.
So your UI tests are not the only tests that will actually quantify your quality of a product. It's also the other different things that will actually help you build in all of the quality into your product.
Yep.
Question about, so it's when I hear, when you say UI test, you really mean end-to-end. Because technically, I can have a UI test, a Selenium test, that has an entirely mocked back end, but it's just validating.
That is view test, in my opinion. That's a view test, because the minute you start integrating with other systems, the product is going to become slow. So you should have more view tests than the journey tests, the end-to-end tests that we are calling about, because that is still lower in the pyramid, in my opinion. View tests sit lower, end-to-end tests sit higher up on that.
When you say UI, I'm thinking visually, and views are UI, so that's why I think that
Yeah. So,
help clarify.
yeah. Again, categorization of tests depends completely on who you speak to. Each team, organization thinks about it in different ways. What works for you, for your team, think about categorization that keeps it very explicit what that meaning is for that type of test. I think that will just help drive that conversation. It's all about seeing end-to-end journeys. So from a UI perspective, when I think of a UI test, a functional test, an end-to-end test, that is what the customers would be doing, the end users would be doing, which means they are really validating the business rules that you are setting up in your product for them to achieve certain functionality. Take a ticket booking site. The flow is very simple, straightforward. Search, select, book in terms of booking, passenger information, payment information, add-ons, whatever might be there, issue ticket. These are business rules that have been implemented, which the customers will be following in the same fashion. The UI test, the end-to-end test, in my opinion, is doing all those. All the various weird combinations in that which are essential to handle resiliency, robustness, scalability aspects, various different aspects. See what is required to be done from an end-to-end perspective. Everything else, push it down to view test. View test is, I don't need to go through the workflow. Do specific things, get done with that validation. Anything below that, maybe JavaScript test or web service test, whatever else might be there. Whichever way you will get quicker feedback, that is what you need to do. Which gets me to the last point, is you need to be very creative. You need to be very innovative. You need to be very talkative in that sense. Because if you don't have those conversations, if you don't think out of the box, you'll end up with the ice cream cone in hand, which tastes better but does not add value to the team. Yes. So the question is, if you have more unit tests, the maintenance effort required for those unit tests will go higher up. And the developer, should they focus on fixing the unit tests or fixing the customer bugs? The whole point is about preventing the customer bugs. You're building quality and you're building the product in such a way that there should be no customer issues coming up. That said, whatever you do, you can never guarantee the product is defect-free. It's all about managing risk. How much are you going to say with a surety that, yes, we've taken care of most of these scenarios. If something else comes up, it's out of our control. We'll have to be very quick in fixing that and doing the right thing at that point in time. The unit tests, the reason it is important to have as many as possible, it runs on the developer machine before they put code into the version control system. They are able to run it over there. Versus for functional now, they might need to have, if they have Selenium based thing, it will run on their machine, doesn't need any license or special setup. And if your framework is built well, they can run specific tests related with that feature, component, whatever it might be, directly from their machine as well. If you have some other specialized tool, then you are doomed. That code has to go into some other version control system, into another repository, some tests run at that point. In the meantime, the devs are not just going to sit over there and play games or whatever. They're going to move on to something else. Well, maybe developers do that, I don't know. But it's all about preventing that from happening. Give control to the people who are making the change, and they'll be able to fix issues as they come up. It's a very loaded question. What is our approach to move from ice cream cone to a proper pyramid? Well, the definition of proper pyramid itself is very vague. It's a concept. Pyramid is a concept. Well, the test pyramid is a concept, not the pyramid itself. What is the right pyramid structure? Only the team can determine that. That pyramid might look like a cylinder for some teams, because it is just not possible to have any more unit tests at that point in time, because you're working on mainframes or some legacy systems of sort. So you cannot really add many more coverage at the unit level without changing the architecture of the systems to a great extent. Versus in some cases, you might have a beautiful pyramid, maybe just one functional test, everything else unit tests. I don't need anything else. That would be ideal. Thousands and thousands of unit tests and one functional test. Maybe zero functional tests. Why do you need a functional test if you can validate everything at unit? So it is very subjective, and maybe we can have a separate conversation for your context where you see the pyramid is and how to move in another direction. It depends on team to team. So we are done with the content. I hope the message came out well in that sense that, yes, Selenium is great. Any UI automation is great. I would love to write more and more tests. I love coding, but it has to add value. It has to add value in terms of building a good quality product. And if it means I can write as many as I can, so be it. If it means I don't need to write a single test, so be it. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Bhumika can take all those. Yeah. This one? Yeah? So the question is, can we give an example of what test can be moved from a UI test to any other layer, for example? Yeah, to unit testing. So let's take an example of providing passenger information for the airline booking site. Which fields are mandatory in passenger booking? First name, last name, sex, date of birth. I don't know what all is mandatory in US. I have not booked a ticket in US for ages. Which other fields are mandatory as passenger information?
Dates. So like your flight dates.
Flight dates. Okay. So let's take these 5 fields for example. A UI test would be, I load the browser, I go to this page, I don't enter any mandatory fields. I try to go to the next one. I get 5 different errors. I'll enter one of those fields, I'll press next again, I'll get 4 errors now. Does it make sense? That's a UI test? Right? That can be one of the UI tests that you are validating error cases, right? Is the error handling happening correctly? Or if I choose zip code, automatically the state gets populated based on that. Maybe that's a feature of the website. There could be a lot of such things happening. Now, where is all this logic really implemented in the UI? It is in the JavaScript. In some cases, the JavaScript would in turn make a call. So based on the zip code, I got a zip code, let me make a call to the backend and find out what the state is. It's an AJAX call that is coming, getting the state information back. It's all happening from the JavaScript. So I don't need 5, 10 different tests at the UI layer to validate these error messages. I could write Jasmine-based or any other framework JavaScript test to validate all this logic. Is error handling working correctly for the mandatory fields or not? But I need to make sure at the end, it is seen correctly in the UI also. So my end-to-end test can say, I'll proceed with no mandatory fields filled in. I ensure I get 5 error messages. When I provide information, I'm able to move ahead. So the journey continues. I ensure that the error messages handling is taken care of in the UI without having a separate test necessarily for it. And the rest of all the combination tests are at the JavaScript level. So that is one example that comes very straight off what you can move from UI to the lower layers. So the question is, JavaScript can be browser specific. How do you test for browser specific JavaScript? Well, that would be a bad thing, I guess, to have browser specific JavaScript. I think IE6 definitely needed a completely different handling. I'm glad we are over that. Yeah, so it's a JavaScript, right? Whether you have, so think about it as, don't think about it as separate JavaScript for different browsers. If you just think of as one browser, it has got so much JavaScript code, I need to write tests for it. Now all you're doing is it's browser specific, so I'll have run JavaScript tests for Firefox, for Chrome, for whatever. It's the same thing. It's just having more tests in the suite, which is going to test browser specific code. And you have to handle it based on that, right? There's never going to be a general rule how to handle specific things. That's where, again, conversations, innovation will come into picture to say, how do we handle this scenario? How can we reduce that browser-specific code to a minimal so that most code can be tested in the common way, and then we test this browser-specific code in a different fashion, which might be there for back-end code as well, for that matter, right? Not necessarily just UI. Okay? Sure. I don't know how we are in terms of time, but I don't know if we have any other questions or thoughts. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity.